Well, hey there, and welcome to Understanding Revelation, Week 5. This week we're reading chapters 11 through 13. And in this passage, we have a time period of 1,260 days. We also see 42 months, and the somewhat more cryptic, a time, times, and half a time. And these are probably all a way of saying 3.5 years. So a time, times, two times, and half a time, 3.5 years. But what does this mean? Is it one time period? Is it multiple time periods? What is this all about? And for that, we're going to take an overview of 4 different views. We're going to continue using our book, Revelation, 4 views. So let's go ahead and dive right in, starting with the historicist view. Now remember, the historicist view has been looking at Revelation covering the whole of history. And so it has arrived at the place of the Reformation, or right before the Reformation. And so it is looking at the measuring of the temple that's described in this section as determining the true church. This is measuring and determining between the true church, as the proponents of this view would define it, and the false church, Catholicism, according to this view. So the 1,260 days are literal days, but using a day for a year method. So it would be 1,260 years. They use different time periods for this, but it may be looking at, for example, AD 538 as the starting point, and AD 1798 when the Pope was taken prisoner. So there's some different dates they suggest, but those would be some kind of example dates of it. 2 prophets that we see in this section refer to those who resisted and stood up against what they would interpret as the false church. And so that would be the kind of the pre-reformers who are pointing out the problems within the Catholic Church. Now, the woman who is going to give birth is the church. She is the true church, persecuted by imperial Rome before AD 313, and her child is the true church within her. So that's how they're going to interpret this section of the passage. You'll note that one unique thing about this is they don't see this section as a flashback. So they don't see the woman giving birth as a reference to the birth of Jesus, but rather to the birth of the true church. Our next view is the Preterist view. This is referring to first century events, and they see the 1,260 days as a period of the Jewish wars or Nero's persecution, or even both. I think this is one of the places where the Preterist view, it's a little tough to get everything matching up. Some of it has really lined up cleanly before, and I'm not so sure here. The 2 witnesses are either the historical, prophetic witnesses of the Jews or the civil and religious authorities in Israel. But this is one area where I don't think you have a clean fit. There's an element as you're measuring the temple that makes a lot of sense with this view, but the prophetic witness, it just doesn't resonate very clearly with the historical events that are going on from the Preterist viewpoint. Preterist view does have a very interesting idea regarding this interlude, and they look back at the 7 seals, and in between the 6th and the 7th seal, there was an interlude about God protecting the true Israel. And here we have an interlude about God protecting the true temple. In both of these cases, Israel and the temple are more than just the kind of the physical things. It's more than ethnic Judaism, and it's more than the physical temple. It is looking at Christianity as the fulfillment and the temple as true worship of God. And so they're saying that in both cases, there's an interlude where although there's destruction, there's a promise of God protecting his true people and true worship. With the 2 beasts which arise here, the first beast is described as being Rome. And the second beast it could be a few things. It could be the cult of the emperor or false prophets in Israel. No matter which one it is, it's the same picture of false worship and people being led astray to it. Our next point of view is the Futurist view, and this is looking forward. Remember, the Futurist view is looking at all of this as being in the middle of the Great Tribulation, in the future event. And the 1,260 days are a period of a literal 3.5 years at the end of the tribulation. or 2 periods of the length totaling 7 years. There's some debate about it, but either way, this is a time period within the tribulation. The two witnesses are seen to be prophetic voices that are going to rise up. Many who hold the futurist view see this as two literal prophets who are going to prophesy, while some see this as being more symbolic of the movement of prophesying against the false worship. Now, one unique and distinct element of the futurist view is that the temple itself here is seen as a literal thing. So the futurist view is looking forward to a time where Israel rebuilds the temple, and all of this is taking place here. It's a very kind of literal interpretation of this passage. And that's one reason why the rise of the state of Israel and some of the events going on in the Middle East are so important in the eyes of futurists, because they kind of are indicating the upcoming possibilities of the events unfolding as they're described here in Revelation. Now, the woman who gives birth to the child is seen as faithful Israel, and she'll be forced to flee to the wilderness during the tribulation. The two beasts we have are representative of two figures that are going to emerge. The first beast is a political leader. The second beast is a religious leader. So we have this picture here that in the tribulation, we have Satan himself kind of pulling the strings and controlling this, but you're going to have a political leader and a religious leader who are guiding and directing people towards false worship, away from God, towards the demonic forces of Satan. And then finally, we have the idealist point of view. And here, the 1,260 days represents the entire church age. So since Christ's ascension through his return. And it's going to be this time of measuring and distinction where there's going to be persecution, and God is going to be faithfully present in the midst of that. The two witnesses are the church throughout the church age. That's the role of the church here, to measure and to do this. The measuring of the temple is the measuring of the true church. Now, the measured inner temple represents true believers, and the unmeasured outer portion represents those who are Christian in name only. And look at the picture that we have here, right? We have this picture of the world trampling on the outside courts of nominal Christianity, right? That those who are not worshiping fully are going to find the world coming in and taking over and just trampling, not just on their beliefs, but on taking over and claiming it for themselves. The world invades false Christianity. That's the picture here. Now, looking at the two beasts, the first beast is the power that persecutes Christians at any time in history. And the second beast is false religion. So we have two separate ideas here with these beasts. And one is governments that turn their power on the people, right? And we see many examples of this throughout history, where governments, where authority, where power stops the worship of God or tries to. In fact, we've even seen some of this in our current setting, that in Canada, for example, pastors have been arrested for worship. And as always, there's going to be this thing, it's for the greater good. But no, this picture here is that when the state raises up and persecutes Christianity and worship, it's this picture of a beast that is actually working on behalf of Satan. The second beast is false religion. That may be about venerating political leaders. I think we may have some of that going on in our current society as well. But it's also just about any religion that draws believers away from true faith in Christ. And so there you go. We have 4 separate views. As we're reading through Revelation, we kind of see this playing out, and we see how they're sort of diverging and going their different ways. We're seeing that in some places, all 4 views fit, and in some places, every view is going to run into some tension. And there you go. That is our lesson for the week. I hope it's helpful. I hope maybe one or all of these views are helping you understand the passage a little better and helping you understand how you see God calling you to interpret this passage, what you think is the best interpretation. And we're going to be continuing next week as we read Revelation 17 through 19.